From FingerLakes1.com, I'm Josh Durso, and this is Inside the FLX. Our program today began on September 9th when National Suicide Prevention Week kicked off with a call for conversation. This month is also National Suicide Prevention Month, and for it, the Seneca County Suicide Prevention Coalition has been hosting a series of Talk Saves Lives trainings. Our guests this hour include Rhonda Jasper, Executive Director of the Seneca County United Way, and Margaret Morse, Director of Community Services for Seneca County. Both are on the Suicide Prevention Coalition here in Seneca County and are here to talk about talking about mental health. Thanks for coming in, guys.
Thanks for having us. Thanks, Josh.
So, I want to start with probably the most basic question we could. Why is suicide so difficult for people to talk about? If you want to lead that off, Margaret.
Well, I think it's very painful. It's a very painful topic. It's related to issues that are highly stigmatized in our culture, such as mental health. People don't want to think that it's something that could happen to their loved one or their child, and sometimes it's easier to avoid thinking about or talking about topics that are uncomfortable or painful. Unfortunately, that's exactly what we need not to do. So what's intuitive for us in terms of avoiding painful topics is exactly the opposite of what we need to be doing to ensure that we can save lives. Talking about it is the way that we save lives.
Agree?
I would agree. I think there's also a sign of weakness in asking for help. Not that there is, but I think a lot of times it's associated with that. If you're unable to help yourself, then we need to make sure that people are comfortable asking for help and know where to go and make sure that help is accessible. And there's always the thought that if you mention suicide to someone, it'll put the idea in their head. If someone was already depressed or, questioning things and you mention the word, the fears, then it's, your fault. And we know that's not the case, but everyone's so worried about saying the right thing or doing the right thing. I think we might even be overthinking it a bit.
So what is the if you guys were sort of creating a coaching guide, what are some of the ways to start a conversation without falling into some of the confusion or pitfalls that might come up in a conversation that's as heavy as that?
Mm-hmm. Being honest, approachable, knowing your own things that you associate with suicide. I mean, it's a very personal issue. A lot of people have some sort of experience with it personally, with a family, a loved one. So knowing where you stand with it and how you're going to react and handle it with someone else, I think is a good preparation. And just being aware that the conversation may go in a direction where you need to reach out for other help and being willing to do that and knowing where to go yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think being direct, not being afraid to ask the question is really important. Many of us were raised believing that if you mention suicide to someone, that it's going to put that idea in their head. We know that's not true. Mm-hmm. I think opening up the conversation with someone, letting them know that you care about them and that you're concerned about them, that you've noticed some things. I noticed every time I've seen you recently that you seem really down, or you've been saying certain things that concern me, things that make me wonder if you're okay. And then asking the question flat out, have you been thinking about killing yourself? Mm-hmm. Not be afraid to ask that flat out. Sometimes if we ask people, are you thinking of hurting yourself, that actually doesn't get to the question, because they may not perceive killing themselves as hurting themselves. So asking the question right out, making sure that, as Rhonda said, you are aware of your own stuff around it, that you are as comfortable as you possibly can be, that you're not shaming or blaming or judging in your approach with that person, and that you are prepared with resources, that you know where to send that person, or numbers and or someone to call yourself for support and assistance after the fact.
The comfort aspect of it I want to talk a little more about, because I think it seems like from the outside, one of the things that may prevent some folks from engaging in this conversation is what they may feel themselves or may have to think about or reconcile with themselves inside their own head. Does that play a role beyond just, my friend or my family member is having this problem, and I'm not sure how to start the conversation?
So, Josh, are you asking if people's own experiences with
is it
the
personal experience combined with what they may have to also think about themselves in terms of their own mental health, contribute to that sort of, I guess, built-in caution around even discussing with someone who may need to hear or be listened to?
Certainly.
Yeah.
I would say for sure, because anyone who has a personal experience with it also has a personal experience with people trying to or not trying to help. So they have all of the reactions and memories that come from that and what helped them and what didn't help them. And unfortunately, everyone's different. So, I mean, if you're coming at it with that never helped, and that's the one thing that person needs.
Right.
That's why it's important just to be as direct as possible and to ask someone what they need and how you can help them. And
right, and to not come at it with your own agenda other than to provide support and resources, and let the person know that they're not alone and that there is help out there. I think it's a great point. I think we all enter every conversation we enter into with our own, stuff. But particularly when we're talking with people about suicide or mental health, it's so essential that we put our stuff aside. But I think it's likely far more uncomfortable for someone who's had a very bad experience, someone reaching out to help them, for example, as Rhonda said. But we need to put that aside, because what we know is that talk does save lives. So we can prevent suicide. We can stop a person from doing this by intervening, by talking with them about it. Mental health treatment is the solution to suicide prevention. So getting people connected with help is key. So regardless of whether or not we've been through something ourselves and maybe it wasn't as helpful, it's really essential that we put that aside and rely on the facts and the research that tell us that this can help.
Well, and I think it's really important to know your own limitations. If this is a conversation you can't have,
that's true.
You need to find someone else who can with that person to make sure someone's checking in with them. It's okay to say this is more than I can handle.
Right.
Just make sure that you're hooking them up with someone who can help.
That's such a great point. Yeah, maybe it's not you. Maybe you need to reach out to someone else to be the person who does it.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as the stigma around mental health and suicide, two-parter, how effectively do you guys think that stigma is being pulled out of the equation? And then also, as far as what we see in the news, how much further do we have to go before we really get to a place where it's a little more balanced?
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think we're steps ahead of where we started. I think a lot more people are willing to talk about it, but I think we're really far from where we need to be, where it's common conversation and the majority of people are comfortable asking the question.
Yeah, I think we have a long ways to go as well, but I do think that we've come a long way. I actually think that the opioid epidemic reaching into white middle class communities has, if there could possibly be in this awful epidemic a silver lining, is that people are no longer able to say those are other people that happens to. And so that conversation, I actually think, has reduced some of the stigma around substance use disorder and mental health, because I think people are becoming more and more aware of the connectivity between those things. So, I think that one of the, as I said, sort of the silver lining in the most awful, tragic kind of.
So, for those who might not, be as educated on this particular topic, speak to that connection and what that connection looks like. Obviously, substance abuse and suicide are linked, but for those who might not understand why, walk us through what that does look like or how the two are connected.
Sure. So, people so 9 out of 10 individuals who kill themselves have a mental health disorder. And a huge number of people who have mental health disorders also have substance use disorders. And for many of those people, substances, sometimes starting from a very young age, are used to self-medicate. People use substances because they make them feel good. And if you feel at baseline you don't feel good at all, you are more likely to utilize substances in unhealthy ways to be able to feel just normal. And so, there's a real strong connection there. And of course, we know with opiates, particularly, the downward turn to losing everything in your life is often pretty quick. And people are left feeling hopeless, not only with opioids, but all sorts of other substances and substance use when it gets to the point of addiction. Really destroys people's lives, and people are left feeling hopeless, and that can lead to suicide.
Mm-hmm. Now, as far as the undiagnosed mental health condition part of this whole discussion, that might be maybe the most undiscussed or untalked about item in this whole issue. Speak to that a little bit in terms of how much of a role that actually plays in challenging those who are trying to prevent it, what that does.
Yeah, so a lot of people, family members that you talk to will say they just didn't know that someone was struggling in this way, or that they had depression being very strongly associated with suicide. They just didn't know. And so I think that education, starting in the schools with kids at very young ages and with parents and families, is just essential. The state is now requiring this. They're requiring mental health curriculum, and the schools in Seneca County are working really hard to enhance their mental health curriculums with their students. Seneca County Substance Abuse Prevention Services is heavily involved in some of that prevention work. But prevention is really the key, and I think that if we can educate and create awareness around what it looks like, what's depression, what anxiety looks like in our young people, that we can help families engage sooner and get their children help.
Now, we're going to talk about the education part of it a little more later, but I know there's going to be some people who listen to this and say, how could they not know? How could a family member not know? It's easy, believe it or not. It's probably easier than most imagine to not know, because of how nuanced it is, right? Like that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, especially if you're dealing with adolescents.
Yeah,
I mean, I have 2 adolescents. And I have no idea on any given day what I will be facing, and I'm sure anyone out there with a parent of teenagers can relate. And so, I mean, not to joke about it. I mean, that is a little funny, but it can be difficult. Yeah. What is normal kind of adolescent angst, anxiety, depression, moodiness? What is that, and what is disorder, and how do you tell the difference between those things?
Well, and if it's someone you see every day, you don't necessarily see changes. Where someone only sees them, once every few weeks, one will be like, wow, they're a lot different the last time I saw them. But when you see someone every day, the gradual changes aren't as obvious.
That's true. And what we know about some forms of mental illness, such as bipolar disorder, the most common age for those symptoms to express themselves is in the early 20s. So a lot of kids are having their first psychotic breaks when they go away to college, and their parents aren't with them, and they have no way of knowing what's happening. They're not there, and they maybe are talking less with their kids, and they're seeing changes, and maybe they're seeing their child experiencing stress and anxiety, but they assume that that's just normal kinds of stuff because it's the first time they're away from home, and it's a huge change to be in college. There's lots of stress. So it's really, it is, I can't agree with you enough. I think that people do say that, well, what do you mean you didn't know? And it's very shaming on families, and believe me, families have enough guilt. They don't need us to shame them further. It's very real that it may be very, very sort of discreet or not so noticeable sorts of things.
Well, in hindsight's 20/20.
Right.
I mean, any person immediately goes back through every conversation, every action, every interaction. Yeah. Well, what did I miss? How could I have seen? So.
And in hindsight, maybe they do see things
right.
they could have seen, but didn't know. So again, I do think that that's where education becomes really important.
And that's going to be a great spot for us to catch our break. We'll be right back in about a minute. We're going to talk more about the education aspect of it and how that can help correct and prevent some of these issues that we see so prevalently. We'll be right back.
Severely injured. I was on a ventilator. My husband was scared, and he just went for the nearest number that he had heard advertised over and over and figured they're the best. They know what they're doing. I think that's the typical reaction, but unfortunately it wasn't the right one, and I'm thankful that we learned that early on in the process. He decided to look for someone locally who would give us a little more personalized attention, and when we met Steve and talked with him, we knew that we had found that person. If you want to feel like you have an attorney who's in your corner, who's going to listen to you, who's going to endeavor to understand you, give Steve a call. I really felt like everyone at Madej, Miras, and Rickey really cared.
For a law firm that cares about you, contact Madej, Miras, and Rickey at 315-568-0911. Prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome.
All right, welcome back to the program. So this morning we're talking about mental health, suicide prevention, and all of that. Here in Seneca County, a really interesting initiative in the last couple of years, the Suicide Prevention Coalition. So some of the folks who are listening might not really know what that's about or what that is. Margaret and Rhonda, if you guys could sort of talk to us about what that is, what the coalition does, and why it exists.
So a couple of years ago, we had at the United Way several of our partners talking about how we didn't have a suicide prevention coalition in the area, and that we really needed to. It was becoming more prevalent in our society. It was obvious that we had a lack of education and prevention, and it needed to happen. So we were able to take the partners and go, hey, did you know so-and-so is talking about this? And get them to the table and said, this is not something United Way wants to own. However, this needs to be a conversation. Right. So fast forward, we got some of the agencies and the bigger players around the table, and the conversation started, and it created this coalition that is really community-driven and community-based. And while certainly some of us have affiliations and titles, most of us are also residents and family members at the table. And so it's definitely not a agency-driven. Of course, also now it's also housed under United Way because that's how things happen, and it needed a home. But it is entirely community driven. It has brought people in. I have never seen so many people want to be part of a steering committee. No one ever wants to be part of the steering committee, and we had to move rooms because there weren't enough people. It's fantastic. But the energy and the dedication of people to improve the community, just to get word out there, to let people know there's people out there talking about it, wanting to make a difference, has been amazing to watch over the past year or so.
Mm-hmm. Does the aspect of repeated tragedy kind of help bolster and keep it sort of in the front of people's minds instead of sort of letting it wander to the back?
Yeah, and I do think, we had in Seneca County a really difficult year when we really started getting the coalition up and running, and that certainly brought the issue to the forefront and brought people to the table. But I regardless, I think that the coalition has been incredibly effective at the community engagement piece, which is, if you've ever done any of these things, is one of the most difficult things to really engage the community and keep them engaged, even when things are calm. I think the coalition's done a really great job. There's just people from all aspects of the community, media, schools, industry, just community members who are not affiliated with any, for the most part, people from other counties coming in on other coalitions wanting to be involved and kind of connect and see what we're doing. So it's been a really great initiative.
So as far as the education goes, we've talked a little bit about it. What does mental health education look like? And then there's another portion of this that I want to talk about afterwards in terms of the stigma, some of the concerns that some parents or folks may have about bringing it to really young ages. But first, what does the actual education part of it look like?
Sure. So mental health education, and I think actually this does connect to your second question regarding families and young kids and stuff like that. So it's not just about teaching people, so I'm not talking about Talk Saves Lives because that's specific to suicide prevention,
course,
but mental health education, the bigger picture, isn't just about talking about mental illness or suicide. It's mental health, which is about how to be healthy, how to take care of oneself, what is emotional wellness, and how do we keep ourselves healthy. Teaching kids and adults about incorporating exercise and meditation and other sorts of wellness activities into one's lives, helping people to understand that we all go through our struggles, and that there's help out there, and that there are things that we can do for ourselves and others that we can reach out to for help to help us get through those natural struggles in life. Then it goes beyond that to help people to understand that there are health conditions, not unlike any physical health condition, that are conditions that affect our brain. And to destigmatize that, to help people understand that mental illness and mental health disorders are no different than any other health disorders. And that's key, I think, to reducing and eliminating stigma, is helping people to understand that depression and anxiety and bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, these are brain disorders that are health disorders, just like heart disease, just like diabetes. These are disorders that people may need medications for, that medications work, that people may need to be on medications for their life to help manage this chronic health issue, just like any physical health issue. So I think that's part of it. The other piece is on a more detailed level, really engaging teachers and communities and parents and students in understanding what the signs and symptoms are of mental health disorder, so that we can intervene and get people help. The sooner and earlier that we get people help, the better their outcomes will be.
Does that sort of contribute to taking the intimidation out of the whole discussion?
I really think it does. And I mean, we really have come a long way, but we have to remember that there are still some, there are still some organizations that teach that, mental illness is sinful, and really that there's shameful kinds of, or that there's choices that are being made, or that, if you just kind of, would just get out of bed and stop being lazy, that they don't understand the reality of and the debilitating nature of depression. They associate it with laziness. So, I think that, again, really teaching people that these are very real chronic illnesses, that, we can see when we do PET scans of people's brains. This is not just like magic, pretend medicine. This is very real. Medication really works. And so that this is not a weakness. I think, Rhonda mentioned the word weakness before, and I do think that that's, historically been how people have viewed not only mental health disorders but substance use disorders, that these are moral or moral weaknesses, or weaknesses of personality. And I think that we have, again, come a very long way with that, but we still have a ways to go. There are people who still don't truly understand the nature and the seriousness of mental illness or mental health disorders, and that this is not something that someone is choosing or that they control.
Well, and I think, talking about it having previously been seen as a weakness, being able to ask for help is a strength.
Yeah.
And, we all have our own issues with asking for help that we've all come over, I'm sure. But it's true. If we had a friend who, was consistently having chest pains, we would all continue to tell them they had to go to the doctor. And I think when we first started all this, Margaret said the best thing. She goes, when someone has a heart attack, there's a group of people, they've already got casseroles in the oven. Like, they're going to bring them over and they're going to be supportive, because if you don't know what else to do, you just show that you're thinking of them and you show support. And we need to get to that point with mental health as well.
We do. But it's different in that, like, if someone has a heart attack, or they have this sort of a physical illness, that just seems less scary. When it's mood, disorders of mood, that's scary to people. They don't know how to interact. If you've had a family member who has killed themselves, people don't know what to say to you. They don't know, they are, really frightened of it because it's mysterious.
I was going to say, is it because it's something that feels less tangible? Like, you can't reach out and touch it like you can a heart attack?
Exactly. It's just less tangible, and it's very mysterious. And when people have different sorts of mental health disorders, they act strangely, potentially. That can be scary. People talk to themselves. People, behave and act in ways at times that don't fit in to social norms. And, that's not something that our, society is generally very accepting of.
Now, let's talk a little bit about Talk Saves Lives. Obviously, there's been a number of press releases and stories about it. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention has been really great about pushing this resource out to small communities like Seneca. What is it? How does it work?
So Talk Saves Lives is basically a pretty brief educational presentation. Anyone actually can become a trainer, and once you've gone through the Talk Saves Lives, you can go through the Train the Trainer. It's really not. It doesn't require any specific teaching skills. So anyone in the community can do this, and we really encourage people to get involved in that way. It's basically a very sort of lay person's introduction to suicide prevention. It offers information and research and statistics to inform. It then shares information about signs and symptoms, and then gives people very sort of simple instructions and guidelines on how to intervene and how to talk to people directly in the way that we've shared during this conversation about asking people if they are thinking of killing themselves. And connecting people to resources. It's really that simple.
And it's not a tremendously. It doesn't ask a lot out of the person who's committing to doing it. It's a pretty simple, straightforward presentation, correct?
It is. In fact, if anyone is interested, I will be presenting Talk Saves Lives with my colleague Tammy Orlop tomorrow from 7 to 8 at the Waterloo Ministry Center. Yep. So you're certainly welcome to come and attend, even if you're just kind of curious what it's all about. It doesn't matter whether you've had this touch your life or not. Please feel free to drop in, and it's about 40 minutes, depending on questions. It can go longer if people engage in conversation. It's a PowerPoint presentation. It's very consumable.
It just gives you more tools to, if you do run into that situation, on how to start the conversation and what to say and where to go. So for anyone who's listening to this and is hesitant about, what if I end up in that, it just gives you a little more, a little more confidence that you can handle this.
Now, with all of the uncertainty around the topic itself, have you guys seen or heard that there are a lot of questions that people tend to ask, or some typical questions that people tend to ask after they absorb this kind of training session?
One of the questions that I think gets asked a lot, and people I think even in the audience may be thinking about, is, well, like, if someone wants to kill themselves, are they just going to do it? So, like, what power do I really have to make a change? And the reality is that no. So suicide is often an impulsive act. And so if we can create distance between the impulsive thought and the action by talking to the person, by intervening, by removing their access to lethal means, there are so many things that we really can do. So that idea that, well, like, if they just want to do it, they're going to find a way to do it, is generally untrue.
Mm-hmm. Now, what is the last question for the hour here? What is the parting message that you guys like to leave with people who either A, might be concerned about this topic after they've absorbed all this information, or might be interested in getting involved with the coalition?
Mm-hmm. You can certainly call the United Way office at any point, or email me. I'm sure Josh can throw our contact information up there to get more information about the meetings and how to join the coalition. But be confident. If you're out there trying to help someone, reaching out and asking someone if they're okay is going to be a good step. Have a plan as to who you can call for help if you need it, but it's okay. Take that step and just ask if someone's okay.
Mm-hmm. And I guess on the other side of that, to know that Seneca County has really significant treatment resources, affordable treatment mm-hmm. resources. So, ability to pay will never be a barrier. All you need to do is call the Seneca County Mental Health mm-hmm. Department right over on Thurber Drive, or just walk in. We have open access walk-in hours in both our addictions clinic and in our mental health clinic. We are trying to reduce all barriers to people being able to just walk in and talk with someone. You don't need to schedule an appointment. Even you just want to sit, you don't even know you want to engage in treatment. You just want to kind of find out more. I'm willing to sit down with anyone who wants to talk at any point confidentially to kind of just learn what's available. So I guess the message that I would leave related more to people who may be thinking of suicide or who are struggling with substance use disorder or mental health is you're not alone. We care about you, mm-hmm. and please don't try and do this on your own. Reach out.
All right. Well, we really appreciate the time you guys coming in to talk about this stuff. You guys will be back, at least one of you will be back in a couple weeks mm-hmm. to talk about an event coming up in October. Yep. So looking forward to that conversation too.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, that's going to do it for us today. I'd like to thank our guests, listeners, and of course FingerLakes1.com for making today's program possible. Until next time, stay informed and download the FingerLakes1.com app for the latest news, weather, sports, and podcasts like this one on your mobile device.